Every autumn, it happens the same way. The garden starts to slow. The days get shorter. The air carries that familiar chill that signals the end of the growing season is close. And somewhere out in the backyard, beneath the soil, the roots are still there, waiting, full, heavy with everything the plant spent the summer building. Most gardeners pull them up, brush off the dirt, and carry them inside with the best of intentions. Some go into the refrigerator, some go into a basket on the counter, some get wrapped in plastic and stacked in the crisper drawer. And by December, sometimes sooner, the rot begins, the softening, the shriveling, the quiet waste of something that took an entire season to grow. But here is what most gardening books never explain. Root vegetables do not rot because of time. They rot because of environment. And the difference between a root that lasts 3 weeks in a refrigerator and a root that lasts 6 months in a properly managed backyard pantry is not luck. It is not the variety. It is not even the soil they were grown in. It is the method. Stay close. Because what is coming up in this video has kept root vegetables fresh through winter for centuries, long before refrigerators existed, and it works just as well in a modern backyard today. There is one root coming up, number 4 on this list, that most people have been pulling out of the ground too early their entire lives. And that single mistake is costing them the best version of that vegetable they will ever taste. Most people do not even know what they have been missing. That is coming. But right now, the first root. And the storage mistake that most people make before winter even begins. Root 1. Carrots. Carrots are the root most people feel confident about. They go in the refrigerator. They come out weeks later still looking mostly fine. And for a lot of gardeners, that feels like success. But a carrot stored in a standard home refrigerator is surviving, not thriving. And there is a meaningful difference between a carrot that survives in storage and one that actually holds its flavor, texture, and nutritional value across a full winter. Here is what is happening inside that refrigerator that most people never think about. The ideal storage temperature for carrots is between 32 and 35 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. Most home refrigerators run between 37 and 40 degrees, which is close but not ideal. Over the course of weeks, that small gap accelerates moisture loss and starch conversion in ways that show up as limpness, reduced sweetness, and a slightly woody texture that was not there at harvest. But temperature is only part of the problem. The bigger issue is humidity. Carrots need 90 to 95% relative humidity to hold their structure across long storage. A standard refrigerator runs between 30 and 50%, far too dry. Without adequate moisture in the surrounding environment, a carrot slowly dehydrates from the outside in. The skin wrinkles, the core toughens, and the sugars that give a fresh-pulled carrot its sweetness begin to break down. The method that solves both problems is sand storage, and it is older than refrigeration by several centuries. After harvest, allow the carrots to cure for 2 to 3 days in a cool, shaded space, a porch, a garage, or a shaded corner of the garden. Do not wash them. The thin layer of soil that clings to the skin acts as a moisture barrier during this initial curing period. Once cured, trim the tops to within ½ an inch of the crown. Leaving the tops attached causes the carrot to continue sending moisture upward into the leaves, pulling it away from the root. Pack the cured carrots into a wooden crate, a plastic bin, or a large bucket layered with slightly damp sand, sawdust, or peat moss. The packing material should be moist enough to hold shape when squeezed, but not wet enough to drip. Alternate layers. Packing material, then carrots laid horizontally without touching each other, then more packing material. No carrot should touch another. Contact points between roots are where rot begins. Store the packed container in the coldest part of the pantry, root cellar, garage, or basement, anywhere that stays consistently between 32 and 40 degrees. Check every 2 to 3 weeks. Remove any carrot that has begun to soften or show signs of decay immediately. One bad carrot left in the box can compromise an entire layer within days. Carrots stored this way will remain firm, sweet, and fully flavorful for 4 to 6 months. Not the pale, limp version that comes out of a refrigerator crisper in February. The real thing. The kind that still tastes like October. Root 2. Beets. Beets are one of the most satisfying roots to store because they are genuinely forgiving. More forgiving than almost anything else in the root vegetable pantry. They tolerate a wider temperature range. They hold their moisture better than carrots, and they keep their color and sweetness through long storage in a way that feels almost effortless when the conditions are even roughly correct. But roughly correct is not the same as correct. And understanding the difference is what separates a beet that lasts 3 months from one that lasts 5. Beets want cold and moist, the same range as carrots, 32 to 40 degrees, with humidity between 90 and 95%. Unlike carrots, beets are more tolerant of brief temperature dips. A basement that hits 28 degrees on a cold January night will not ruin a well-packed beet. What will ruin it is prolonged warmth. Temperatures above 50 degrees trigger the beet to begin converting its stored sugars back into starch. A beet that has gone starchy is not dangerous, but it is not the same vegetable. The sweetness fades, the earthiness turns harsh, and the texture becomes mealy in a way that cooking cannot fully fix. Harvest beets after the first light frost if possible. A light frost triggers the plant to convert additional starches into sugars, a survival response that makes the beet sweeter and more shelf-stable. Going into storage. Cut the tops to within 1 inch of the crown, leaving a short stub. Do not cut flush. Cutting too close opens the beet's vascular tissue to moisture loss and bacterial entry. Do not wash before storage. Washing removes the thin protective skin layer and dramatically shortens shelf life. Brush off loose soil with a dry cloth and leave the rest. Pack beets in the same sand or peat moss method used for carrots. They can share a storage container if the temperature and humidity are the same. Keep the layers loose. Keep each beet from touching its neighbor, and check regularly. One detail that matters more for beets than for most other roots. Beets bleed. If a beet is cut, nicked, or damaged during harvest, moisture begins to seep from the wound almost immediately. Damaged beets do not belong in long-term storage. Use them fresh within a few days. Only firm, undamaged beets with intact skin go into the winter pantry. Stored correctly, beets will keep for 4 to 5 months, arriving in late winter as firm, sweet, and vibrantly colored as the day they came out of the ground. Route 3. Turnips. Turnips are one of the oldest stored vegetables in human history. Before the potato arrived in Europe from the Americas, the turnip was the root that fed families through winter across the northern hemisphere. Generations of farmers learned its rhythms, learned what it needed, learned what it could tolerate and what it could not. Most modern gardeners have lost that knowledge entirely. Turnips are cold hardy in the ground. They can survive light frosts and even moderate freezes while still in the soil, which makes them one of the last harvests of the autumn season. But once pulled, they become more delicate than their reputation suggests. They want cold storage, between 32 and 40 degrees, and high humidity. What makes turnips different from beets and carrots is what they do to the air around them. Turnips release ethylene gas as they breathe in storage. Ethylene is a natural ripening compound that most root vegetables produce in small amounts, but turnips produce it at higher levels. In a sealed or poorly ventilated space, ethylene accumulates, and elevated ethylene levels accelerate the ripening and eventual decay of everything stored nearby. A box of turnips in a sealed bin begins to degrade faster than turnips stored with gentle airflow around them. This means turnips need containers with ventilation, wooden crates with gaps between the slats, mesh bags, or bins with holes drilled in the sides. The sandpack method still works for moisture retention, but the outer container must allow air to move through rather than sealing the roots in a closed environment. There is another detail that the old farming guides knew well and modern storage charts almost never mention. Turnips and apples should never share a storage space. Apples produce ethylene at extraordinarily high levels, and a single crate of apples near a bin of turnips will cause the turnips to ripen and rot weeks ahead of schedule. The same is true of pears, quinces, and most stone fruits. Keep them far apart, not just in different containers, but in different areas of the storage space entirely. Harvest turnips before a hard freeze. Light frost is fine and improves the flavor considerably, but a hard freeze that penetrates deep into the soil can damage the cellular structure of the root in ways that will not be visible until the turnip begins to decay from the inside. Trim tops to 1 inch. Cure for 2 to 3 days in a cool, shaded space. Pack in damp sand in a ventilated container and store in the coldest part of the pantry. Turnips stored correctly will keep for 4 to 5 months. And the flavor, which mellows and sweetens considerably as the weeks pass, will be far more nuanced by January than it was at harvest in October, halfway through. And the root that surprises most people is coming up next. If this channel is new to you, subscribe before moving on. New videos go up every week covering everything that goes into a backyard pantry. The button is right below. It is free, and it means none of this gets missed. Root 4, parsnips, the one most people pull too early. Here is the root that was mentioned at the beginning, parsnips, and the mistake that most people have been making their entire gardening lives without ever realizing it. Most gardeners who grow parsnips pull them in late autumn alongside their carrots and beets. The season is ending. The tops are dying back. Everything else is coming out of the ground, and the parsnips come with it. And parsnips harvested that way are decent. Firm, starchy, mildly earthy, usable in a soup or a roast. Nothing wrong with them. But they are not what parsnips are capable of being, not even close. Here is the secret that the old kitchen gardeners understood and that almost nobody talks about today. Parsnips have a trait that is almost unique among root vegetables. Cold does not damage them. Cold transforms them. The longer a parsnip sits in near-freezing ground after the first hard frost, the sweeter and more complex it becomes. The starch inside the root slowly converts to sugar, not in a damaging way like it does in a refrigerated potato, but in a slow, building way that deepens the flavor week by week. A parsnip pulled in October is starchy and flat. That same parsnip left in the ground under a layer of straw mulch and pulled in February is one of the sweetest, most richly flavored vegetables a backyard garden can produce. Most people have never tasted a parsnip at its actual best, because most people pull them before winter ever has a chance to do its work. This means parsnips have two legitimate storage strategies, and both are worth knowing. The first is to leave them in the ground. Parsnips are extraordinarily cold hardy. They can survive ground temperatures well below freezing without cellular damage, provided the freeze happens gradually. A thick layer of straw mulch over the bed insulates the soil enough to keep it from freezing solid in most climates, allowing parsnips to be pulled fresh throughout winter and into early spring. Mark the bed clearly before the ground hardens so it can be found under snow. Then pull as needed through the coldest months when the root is at its sweetest. The second strategy is cold storage indoors, the same sandpack method used for carrots, at temperatures between 32 and 38 degrees with high humidity. This produces a parsnip that sweetens steadily in storage and far outperforms anything bought at a store. But it does not quite match the depth of flavor that comes from leaving the root in the ground through a proper northern winter. Harvest parsnips after at least 2 or 3 hard frosts have penetrated the soil. This is not optional. The frosting period is the trigger for everything that makes a parsnip worth waiting for. Parsnips pulled before any frost are starchy and unremarkable compared to what they become. If storing indoors, cure for 3 to 4 days in a cool, shaded space before packing. Trim tops to 1 inch. Pack in damp sand in a ventilated container. Store at the coldest temperature available. Parsnips, unlike most other roots, genuinely welcome near freezing conditions. Check monthly. Parsnips stored this way will keep for 4 to 6 months and will continue to sweeten slowly throughout the entire storage period. By the time February arrives, a well-stored parsnip from the previous October's harvest will be at its absolute peak, rich, sweet, and complex in a way that is entirely the product of patience, cold, and time. Root 5, rutabaga. Rutabaga is the root that built winters. Not in a poetic sense, in a literal one. For centuries across northern Europe and the British Isles, the rutabaga was the vegetable that stood between farming families and genuine food scarcity in the coldest months of the year. It was reliable. It was dense with nutrition. It stored longer than almost anything else that came out of the autumn garden, and it asked very little in return. Most modern gardeners grow it occasionally, if at all. Most modern storage guides give it a paragraph at best. And that is a genuine loss, because rutabaga is one of the most rewarding roots a backyard pantry can hold. Rutabaga is a cross between a turnip and a wild cabbage, and it inherits the best storage qualities of both. It is cold hardy in the ground, tolerant of frost, and capable of surviving light freezes without cellular damage. It is denser and more moisture-rich than a turnip, which means it holds its texture and flavor across longer storage periods, without the thinning and shriveling that affects lighter roots. The ideal storage temperature for rutabaga is between 32 and 40 degrees, with humidity between 90 and 95%. This puts it in the same range as carrots and beets, which means a single well-managed storage space can hold all three through the same winter. Without any conflict, harvest rutabaga after the first hard frost. Unlike some roots where frost is merely helpful, for rutabaga it is close to essential. The freeze triggers a starch-to-sugar conversion that softens the sometimes sharp, bitter edge of a freshly pulled root and replaces it with a mellow, slightly sweet earthiness. A rutabaga pulled before any frost and a rutabaga pulled after 2 weeks of cold nights are almost different vegetables at the table. After harvest, trim the tops to within 1 inch of the crown and allow the roots to cure in a cool, shaded space for 3 to 5 days. Rutabagas have tougher skin than carrots or beets, a natural advantage in storage, but that skin still benefits from curing, particularly around any wounds from harvest. There is a traditional practice for rutabagas that is worth reviving: waxing. Before cold storage, rutabagas were often dipped in a thin layer of food-grade paraffin wax, the same wax used in home canning. The wax seals the skin completely, locking moisture inside across a much longer storage period than an unwaxed root can sustain. A waxed rutabaga, stored at the right temperature and humidity, will keep for 5 to 6 months with almost no quality loss. An unwaxed rutabaga stored identically will keep for 3 to 4 months before the skin begins to soften and shrivel. Waxing is simpler than it sounds. Melt food-grade paraffin in a double boiler. Dip each cured rutabaga briefly, 2 to 3 seconds, then set on a rack to cool. The wax layer should be thin and even. Once set, the rutabaga can be packed loosely in a crate or bin without the sand pack method. The wax does the work of the sand. Stored this way: harvested after frost, cured properly, waxed, held in cold and humid conditions. A rutabaga from October's garden will still be dense, flavorful, and fully nutritious well into March. It will not have shrunk. It will not have gone soft. And when it comes out of storage and goes into a winter pot, it will taste exactly like what it is: a root that was grown with patience, treated with knowledge, and kept alive all the way through the darkest months of the year. 5 roots, 5 different sets of requirements. But underneath all of them, a handful of truths that apply to every root vegetable that comes out of a backyard garden. Harvest at the right time. Not when the calendar says so, when the plant says so. The tops begin to die back, the skin firms up, the root reaches its mature size. Harvest too early and the root has not finished building its reserves. Harvest too late and it has already begun to spend them. Cure before storage. Every root on this list benefits from a curing period between the ground and the storage space. Even a firm carrot and a perfect beet have surface moisture and microscopic harvest wounds that a few days of curing will address. The time spent curing saves weeks of storage life. Never wash before storing. Washing removes the thin, protective layer that a root's skin provides and introduces moisture that invites bacterial growth from the first day in. Storage. Brush off loose soil. Leave the rest. Wash only immediately before eating. No damaged roots in long-term storage. One soft spot, one deep nick, one crack in the skin. That root belongs in this week's kitchen, not in the winter pantry. Damage is a doorway for rot. And rot in a storage bin does not stay in one place. Check regularly, every 2 to 3 weeks. Go through the containers and remove anything that has begun to soften, smell, or show visible mold. A single deteriorating root left in place will compromise its neighbors faster than most people expect. Label everything: date of harvest, variety, storage method. The pantry built carefully in October becomes a mystery by January, without clear records. A piece of tape and a marker on every container costs almost nothing and saves a great deal of waste. And match the method to the root. The single most common storage mistake in a backyard pantry is treating all roots the same. One cold space, one bin, one approach for everything. But turnips need more airflow than beets. Parsnips welcome near-freezing temperatures that would hurt other roots. Rutabagas reward waxing in a way that carrots never need. The pantry that works is the one built around the specific needs of each root, not around. Convenience. There is something quietly powerful about a pantry that works, not just as a storage space, but as evidence of something. Evidence that what was grown in the backyard over the course of one season does not have to end when the frost arrives. That the carrots pulled in October can still be on the table in March. That the parsnips left under a layer of straw through a northern winter will come out of the ground sweeter in February than they ever were in autumn. That the rutabaga waxed and packed in a cold corner of the basement in October will still be dense and full of flavor when the ground outside is. Frozen solid root vegetables were the original pantry, long before refrigeration, long before grocery stores opened 365 days a year, long before anyone could simply go and buy whatever was needed in any season. Families fed themselves through winter on what came out of the ground in autumn, and on the knowledge of how to keep it alive. That knowledge did not disappear. It was simply set aside for a few generations while the modern food system made it seem unnecessary. It is not unnecessary. It is one of the most practical skills a backyard gardener can build, and it costs almost nothing to implement. A few wooden crates, a bag of damp sand, a corner of a garage or basement, and the understanding of what each root actually needs. The pantry worth building is the one that works through the whole winter, not just the first month. The whole thing. If this video helped make sense of what happens to roots after the harvest, share it with someone who has a garden and a pantry full of vegetables they are not quite sure how to keep. And if there is a root growing in the backyard that was not covered today, drop the name in the comments. The next video might be built around it. Subscribe if this is your first visit, and come back next week. Until then, keep harvesting.